So welcome everyone to our next tea break webinar. Today we're going to be talking about the table template, and we're going to be walking around a bit of the theory about when it might be better to use a table rather than more typical charts, and then we'll talk more about how to use them in Flourish. So yeah, we'll spend a bit just talking about tables first and then dive into the app and make a start. As always, if you have any questions, a couple of my colleagues are in the chat to help out with them. So if you can just pop them in the chat, and if we don't get them during the session, we'll have a look at the end. And as always, all these slides and the recording of this session will be available after the webinar on our website. So we'll make a start. So yeah, like I said, we'll start with when to use tables and maybe when it's not so appropriate to use tables. And we'll spend a bit of time looking at that and some examples of different use cases. And then we'll dive into the Flourish app and talk about how you can go about starting to create a table in Flourish. And we'll walk through a few key features that are useful to know how to use to really make your table the most effective. And then we'll finish with some mobile settings. So thinking about how you can use some of the settings we have available in this template to adapt what your table will look like so it's more optimal for a mobile screen. Okay, so I'll dive in as there's quite a bit to cover. First of all is when it might not be appropriate to use tables. So, you know, we're quite used to having like spreadsheets full of data that we want to transform into ways to visualize it. And while it can be good sometimes charts just work better. So in this example we have on the slide here, I've got some UK energy production data, so data over time for different energy sources. And you can see in the table example here, it's just a whole lot of data that is quite hard to process on its own to sort of gain insights from. Whereas this stacked area chart here, it just works better for this data because you can quickly take a glance at this chart and identify really key insights really quickly. So you can see that there's a declining trend over time, but things have stabilized in the last few years. You can see the diminishing use of coal as well as the magnitude of gas and petroleum compared to these renewable sources. So just with a quick glance at that chart, you're able to take away some quick sort of summary information about it, whereas you can't really do that in the same way with this table. We couldn't look at this table and identify those same things as quickly. So in this case, when you're showing the shape or the distribution or the trend of data, tables as a whole are not necessarily the most appropriate. And when you want to compare a lot of values at once, giving an overall idea with the chart can be a better way to associate it with. And assessing relationships. So here we're looking at the relationship with energy over time. And again, that's not really something that it's really easy to identify from the table. You know, if we wanted to know the exact value of natural gas production in 2006, that's what the table might be better for. We'd be able to identify the actual exact value here in a way that we might find it more difficult with the chart. But sort of overall, in this case, table's probably not the most suitable. But when is it better to use tables? So like I mentioned there, if you want to find the raw data, unlike charts where we typically just look at them, we kind of read tables and they contain the raw data. So if you need exact values and more precision, a table might be a good choice because it's, you know, we've not done any processing to that raw data that's being displayed in the table. Another reason people might want to use a table is to compare individual entries across different variables. So overall comparison of a lot of values at once is not necessarily where tables are great. But if you do want to compare, you know, one particular entry across different variables with a chart, that might have to involve showing one at a time with filters or, you know, a faceted grid. So it might struggle to show them all at once in a way that tables don't. So just to show that example, I've got some data here, which we created a couple of years ago, which was about university rankings. So this is worldwide university rankings. And you can see that in this case, we've still got quite a lot of data here, but a table's quite useful if I want to pick out a particular university, or even compare a couple of these across various different variables. In this case, a table can be quite useful when I'm not trying to get an overall trend across every entry in the data, but I just want to compare either one individual entry across several variables or a couple with each other. It can be quite useful in a way that trying to plot this data on a bar chart like this, here it's quite difficult. I'm only actually including 3 of the columns of data that was in this table, these rank columns here in the bar chart. So it's providing less information, but it's still a bit more overwhelming. And I can also only sort by, one of these ranks at a time. So it's not as a useful a way for this data to be able to read that information in a way that the table provides a better experience. And then a third example with tables where they're almost most effective is more like a lookup table. So the sorts of thing which you might see on news websites, where you have things like find out more about your area, or if people want to find a specific value in the table. There's been a lot of this with COVID data over the past couple of years, where you want to provide all the information so everyone can find themselves in the data. But this is especially effective when you use interactivity to help the user find those things, so they don't even have to go searching through the whole table. So things like search boxes and filtering and sorting. And those are the kind of features that we're going to show you later in the Flourish template. So lookup tables can be a really effective way of using this template. So that's the kind of when not to and when to use tables. But there's also a wide array of different kind of use cases for them. So we're just going to quickly run through these examples, and then we'll dive into the app. And all of these are ones that we've created in Flourish. So first of all, we were talking there about the searchable database. So being able to have a table that has the full data and users can find themselves in it. And using those things like searches and filters and sorting. Similarly, one that backs up your other visuals. So it might be that you want to have some charts and some summary graphics that, pick out some key insights about parts of your data, but still have a table there to provide the full data for those who need it. So it can be used as a kind of backing up other visuals in a way that you can, provide the full information if necessary underneath without it, but still being able to kind of have that narrative with some summary charts. Another one is to use some multimedia to make it a bit more engaging. So this is a fixtures table with flag images. Let's just show you this one that we made for the Euros last year. So here we've got, a different kind of table, really different use case here, but we can add multimedia like images and all kinds of other things with custom HTML and CSS, just to make it really recognizable. If someone wants to search for their country here, they can quickly see the fixtures. So entirely different use case. And again, another kind of way of using the table in a different context is a kind of summary visual. So in this case, we've thought about showing pricing plans. So here's a kind of typical example of if you want to show different pricing plans on your website, the different features available, just a really simple view of this table rather than blocks of text can be particularly effective. Another one here is to add further context. So like we've seen in that first example of the charts, sometimes charts you can only plot one particular variable on a map or show it on a chart, but you want to provide extra context in a way that a table can provide that. So here what I have is a London borough map where we're only able to plot one thing on this map. In this case, I've gone for population. But what I can do is use our panels features, where when I click on an area here, it's going to pop up with this panel, which inside I have a table that provides all kinds of extra demographic statistics there. So this is where panels can come in handy, and we'll add a couple of help docs in the end of these slides that show you more about how to embed other Flourish graphics inside of panels. The final example here I've got is adding custom HTML. So like we've done with the images here, you can also add anything else really that you want to customize your table. In this case, we've got our webinar table on our website here, and we've used custom HTML to add web links to the dates here, which forward to a registering link. So the table template is super flexible in that you can add all the custom HTML and CSS you want. We've also styled these titles here to bolden them as opposed to the normal text here. So that's a kind of quick run through of all kinds of different ways you can use tables. And these are kind of more advanced ways that you can use our template in particular to come out with all kinds of different use cases. But let's now dive into actually creating one in Flourish. Yes, one more thing I wanted to show you beforehand. This was a really nice GIF that I found on a website called Dark Horse Analytics. And this was just more about when you're thinking about the design of your tables, how you can make something a lot more readable and a lot more clear by often simplifying it and just using some, handy like heuristics to make a table that's much more readable. So this might come across better when I've uploaded the slides and you can take a look at this GIF yourself. But it's just a way to format your table, and lots of the ways you can format here are possible with the formatting settings in the template. So moving into Flourish, there are a couple of things with the table template that work a little bit differently to a lot of our other templates. So I just want to start from scratch, creating a table, and these 4 first steps are really where you want to begin. So just like any other template, we're going to choose a starting point from the template chooser page and upload our data first. We're going to add the data binding, which in the table template is a little bit different. So because a table, you're uploading your data in this spreadsheet format, and in, say, a bar chart, you're going to need to tell the template that one column is for your, your x-axis and one's for your values and other features like that. In the table template, that spreadsheet view pretty much translates into the layout of your table. So we just have this single column binding, which any columns that you want in your table, you bind to that. The next step is pop-ups in your cells, which works slightly differently as well. And once you've done that, we're ready to start customizing back in the preview tab. So I'm going to dive into the app now and just run through those steps. So from my homepage, I'm going to click New Visualization, and I'm going to scroll down and find our table template. So there is a couple of starting points here. I'm going to start with just our default one. So here we have our table with some default data in there just to show you what you can do, but I'm going to head straight to the data tab in this case. So here we've got all our data, and you can see this is that one single column binding. So instead of having different column bindings for different features, we just have that one, and I'm going to make sure that all my columns are bound to that column binding. Now, the next thing I mentioned was pop-ups. So typically with pop-ups, in, like I said, say a bar chart, we're going to have a pop-up that's related to a specific series in the data, but tables work a bit differently just by the layout, really. So in table template, we can actually add pop-ups to individual cells, and we do that through a specific syntax directly in the data sheet. So we have a help doc here, which explains a bit more about pop-ups in the table template. And you can see as an example here, we can get all kinds of custom pop-ups as I'm hovering over these different individual cells. So in the template, this works like this. So we go straight into a cell in the data sheet, and you use this syntax of a double arrow. So this double arrow is indicating that anything that comes after that, we want in the pop-up itself. So when I'm hovering over the cell rather than in the cell. So I can put my content here. And when I head back to the preview tab and hover over Alabama, I'm getting my pop-up here. So that's how pop-ups work a little bit differently. Okay, so yeah, I can see a question in the chat, using commas in the bindings in order to skip columns. Absolutely, yeah. So the kind of 2 symbols used in the column bindings are hyphens if you want to do consecutive columns, but also commas. So if I wanted to, say, miss out this official state nickname column, I could do A-C and then do E and so on. So by doing that, it's skipping out this. So yeah, commas and hyphens are the ways to miss out particular columns. So that was how we do pop-ups, and pretty much that's all you need to do in the data tab with the table template. Everything else is going to happen back in this preview tab and is all about customizing your table. So we've got a few different key features. I mean, there's all sorts of things we could show you in the table template, but there's a few key ones that I want to pick out that are particularly useful and ones that you might want to consider customizing a bit from the default. So these include cell styles, sorting, mini charts, that's these mini line and bar charts here, and different search modes. So first of all, we're going to talk about sorting. So our table template by default will have all of the columns sortable, and the sorting works, this is whether it's embedded or in the app as well, is that the user can come and click on any of the header names here, and at first it will sort it in ascending order. On the second click, we'll get a descending order, and then a third click will reset it to the original sorting order of the data. So I can sort the capital here alphabetically or reverse alphabetically, and then click again to come off. If you have mini charts here, they sort slightly differently because of the numbers in them. So the stacked bar charts will sort by the stack total. So I can get the largest bars in that way and the shortest bars. And the line charts here sort by the slope. So if I sort this in ascending order, it will have the steepest slope, then it will have the flattest slope, and then it will reset. Over here in the settings panel, you can also customize which columns you want to be sortable. So it might be that you don't want any of your columns sortable. Once I click that to none, then clicking on these headers is not going to sort them at all. Or you only want some. So I can use this custom option and just add the name, the column header here. So if I just want my state column here to be sortable, just add that one, and then only this column will be sortable. The other ones won't have the same function. So that's our sortable columns. There are a couple of other settings in here, but they're pretty intuitive. So I'm going to move on to this cell styles section. Again, we've got some kind of typical height, padding, alignment type settings. This wrap text in cell is one that you may want to consider, particularly if you've got long content in your cells. You may want it to wrap. But I'm going to skip down to this cell colors section here. So sometimes you might want to emphasize particular parts of your table by coloring the cells in a particular way. And if you've used our color overrides, that's for like changing the specific colors of bars or other elements in other templates, then you'll be used to a similar kind of syntax here. But if you hover over this question mark here, it gives you some more information. So I can customize the background color, text color of my cells individually based on their content. So I'm just going to copy a bit of this syntax that I've got here. So what I have here is I have my background color of the cell that I want it to be, my text color, and this here is the cell content. So we've got this Phoenix cell here, and once I click out, you can see that only that cell, because it's got that Phoenix content, is going to be styled in that way. So similarly, I could do California in different colors. And this cell content is very specific to the whole of that cell. So you can see here, I've actually got California in this cell, but it's not colored because it's not the full content of that cell. So that's how you can use coloring cells. For more information on the syntax, you can just hover over this question mark here, and it will give you a bit more of an explanation. The next setting, which is particularly useful, I'm going to scroll down here, is this column width. So by default, the table will adjust the column widths to the content, what it thinks is optimal. But there are some other options, and this is a feature where it's quite useful for some nice little workarounds as well. So I can have equally spaced columns, nice and even, or I can use this custom option. And in here, I can specify individual widths for each of my columns, either in percentage terms or in pixels. So here, if I wanted my first column for some reason to be really long, I could put 80% and then, lower after that, which is going to create an odd looking table, but just so you can get an idea of how that's going to adjust the widths. And similarly, I could do it in pixels instead. So I could have my second column super long by doing 500 pixels. So it's pixels or percentage terms here. And one thing this is really useful for actually is sometimes we want to use this search bar, but some people like to have people able to search in this search box based on a particular column, but not actually include that column in the table. So in this case, say I wanted to search by state, but not actually include that in the data. I can simply use a 0% or 0 pixels for my first column, and that's effectively going to hide that column, even though it's technically still there in the table. So I can search for Alabama and it will return the rows for Alabama without that state column having to take up space in my table. So that's quite a useful workaround if you need to hide the column that you want to search on. I'll go back to my auto one in this case though. So that's the column feature, just a couple more features to show you in here. And the next one, I'm going to close this cell styles and talk about these mini bar and line charts. So this is a really nice feature that allows you to kind of combine the typical table with a bit more visual elements. So in this case, I'm going to go back to the data tab here, but bear in mind we've got this vote share one, which is split into Clinton and Trump. And then we have this population line chart here. Now in my data tab, I actually have all numeric columns here. So I've got the columns for Clinton and Trump that are making up my bar chart. And then I've got a series of different columns that are making up my line chart, which is showing population. So what I can do here is add my columns as normal in the data sheet. But when I go back to the preview tab and in these settings here, I can convert those numeric columns into mini line and bar charts. So for the bar charts, this works in a similar way to the sortable feature in that you just add the column headers as they appear in the data sheet. So Clinton and Trump here. If I were to remove one of these, we'd just get a single column. So we add these in, and then you can name your new column in combining them, and then you can choose the kind of customizations of what you want your mini bar charts here to look like. So in this case, a horizontal stack bar makes most sense for the content, but I could have a vertical bar chart, and I could have things like stack percentage rather than just stacked, which means they total 100%. And various other customizations that you're able to have, pop-ups, whether you want to show the values in the pop-ups or not. You can have inline ones that show the values right on the bar as well. And whether you want a legend, which appears above your table. So that's the mini bar charts, and the mini line charts work in a similar way in that you want to add all of the columns that should be, popped into a line chart together and a new column name as well. In this case, I'm choosing to share as an area chart, which just fills in that space below, but I can turn that off if I want to. So quite a simple way to really make your table a lot more visual, having all of those columns, a bit like with that energy data at the start, we wouldn't be able to really comprehend them with all those values. So sometimes you do want to show a bit of data in your table, but this is a really nice way to easily see which states have grown in population the most, and that sort of information. So that's our mini line and bar charts. The final one I wanted to show you just before we go on to the mobile type settings is the search. So searches really make the tables an effective way to present this information when people are able to just search for the information they need. And this table works as a row filter. So once I type something in the search, it's going to only return the rows that would have returned for that search. So similarly, if I say Alabama, it's going to return Alabama. But sometimes you need to customize the kind of mode in which it's searching for something. So we have 3 different modes: anywhere, start, and whole. And you can see that returned Alabama as expected there. But if I were to type in Kansas with this anywhere mode, it would return Kansas, but also Arkansas because it has Kansas in the name. So this is where if you really want to only return exact matches or in a different way of searching for it, you can use these modes. So anywhere is going to search anywhere in the word. Start is going to just search from the start of that cell's content. And then whole is going to be the sort of exact match. So in this case, I can either use start or whole, and it will only return Kansas. But let's say, for example, if I was going to search for, something else, it might be that something is only at the start of the word, and I can use the whole just to make sure it's an exact match. A couple of other nice features with the searching is sometimes you might have an absolutely huge table, and you might want to hide the table before a search happens. So this, you have what looks like a very empty graphic, and only when someone starts typing does it return the search. Similarly, you can choose which columns you want to search on. So only maybe the first one. In this case, if I search for state, if I search for California now, it's only going to search on that first one. So another row that had this similar state bird wouldn't come up because it's only searching on that one. And finally, this suggestions drop down. So sometimes you don't want someone to have to search exactly. So this is allowing me to give me some options about what I can return in my table. And you can choose to have that, I believe it's after the third character someone types, or always show drop downs with this little tick box. So that's going to give me options before I even start typing. So that was a really quick run through of a whole bunch of settings. I'm just going to quickly check in the chat. Can you use copy and paste for cells or columns as you would in Excel? I'm not quite sure. If you mean sort of getting them into the data sheet, you can copy and paste from Excel, or you can use the upload button. I'm not sure if I've understood that correctly, but yep, we'll come back to that in a minute. So just a final thing, which I've got a minute left to show you this, I might run over a couple of minutes, is just about mobile view. So tables can be really great for showing a lot of information, but typically if you've, after a certain number of columns, they're not going to be that great in experience on smaller devices because of they just becoming wider. So we have a couple of extra settings, which allows you to embed your typical table that will look like a normal table on desktop, but it will switch to a slightly different mode on mobile, just so it's really easy to see that information. So just back in the app here, I'm going to go to these mobile view settings. So as it is, if I go to this table view, you can see that once I go onto mobile, this is one option, which is this scroll bars view, which means that once I go onto mobile, it will just have a horizontal scroll that someone will need to slide across to view the full table. And this might be a good option for your data. It's kind of based on the use case here. But sometimes you might want just a different layout that's better suited to the smaller devices. And that's where this blocks mode comes in useful. So the blocks mode takes each row, all of the content across all the columns, and kind of wraps it into one place. So you see one row at a time. So you can see on desktop here, I'm still seeing my full view of the table. But when I go to mobile, it's stacking, that first Alabama row, all of the information for Alabama first, then Alaska, and so on. So this blocks mode can be a really useful way to, without having to, embed different things for mobile and desktop. As long as you're in this mode, it will switch between it. And you can choose the breakpoint at which it switches. So it might be that you want this on a tablet size as well, in which case you could just increase the breakpoint and it will only go after a later point. And similarly, this last setting allows you to set a different pagination level on mobile. So it might be that on desktop, you want to have 15 rows to a page, but on mobile, that would be far too much. So adjusting this, I may only even want one to a page. It'll just show one, and I can scroll through the pagination buttons here. So that kind of covers all of the handy settings in the table template that we wanted to show in this session. I'm leaving a whole host of resources here. There's lots of information like how to use those pop-ups, how to use that specific syntax, and also some handy hacks for using the template to create different kinds of visualizations, like a categorical heat map or even a bar chart individually. So these help docs will be in the slides. And finally, if you have any other questions, then we can stick around for a couple of minutes, or you can always email us afterwards at hello@flourish.studio.